My name is Jessica, and I never imagined my life would end on a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Before that moment, I was just like anyone else, entirely consumed by the exhausting, mundane rhythm of modern existence. My mind was a constant hamster wheel of superficial anxieties. The mountain of bills waiting on the kitchen counter, an upcoming performance review at work, the endless influx of emails, and the minor irritation of rush hour traffic. I wasn't someone obsessed with conspiracy theories, dark internet rabbit holes, or strange biblical mysteries. I was a practical person. I went to church occasionally, mostly on holidays, prayed when life got a bit too heavy and I needed guidance, and maintained a quiet, comfortable belief in God. But I never truly paused to contemplate the hidden, darker dimensions of Scripture. The things most people avoid talking about in polite Sunday school classes, the Nephilim, fallen angels, ancient cosmic rebellions, were just old stories to me. They were archaic metaphors, ancient folklore meant for a time long past, possessing absolutely zero relevance to my everyday life. I was far more concerned with my bank account balance than the spiritual realm. That narrow, comfortable worldview shattered into a million pieces the day I died. It was just a regular afternoon, the sun casting long, lazy shadows across the asphalt as I drove home from the office. My mind was drifting aimlessly from one trivial thought to another. I was mentally cataloging the ingredients in my refrigerator, wondering what to cook for dinner, calculating how much money I had left to last me until the next paycheck, and feeling the heavy, familiar ache of a long workday settling into my shoulders. Up ahead, the traffic light transitioned from green to a solid, warning yellow. I hesitated for just a single, fatal second. It was that classic, micro-decision we all make 1,000 times. Do I slam on the brakes, or do I press the gas and make it through? I decided to go through. I never made it to the other side of that intersection. A massive commercial truck, one I hadn't even seen coming from my peripheral vision, ran its red light and slammed directly into the driver's side of my compact car. The impact was instantaneous, a cataclysmic eruption of violence so severe that reality itself seemed to fracture. Time didn't just slow down, it froze. Then came the pain. It wasn't an acute ache or a sharp sting. It was a devastating, crushing sensation, an unimaginable pressure that squeezed my torso from all sides, instantly collapsing my ribs and fracturing my spine. My lungs gasped desperately for air, but there was no oxygen to be found, only the metallic taste of blood and the suffocating heat of expanding airbags. I could hear the horrifying symphony of the crash play out in agonizing slow motion, metal screeching and buckling like paper, safety glass shattering into a million tiny, glittering diamonds, and the distant, distorted sound of bystanders screaming in terror. But just as the agony reached a crescendo that my brain could no longer process, something miraculous and terrifying happened. The pain started to fade. It didn't taper off gradually like a medicine taking effect. It vanished all at once, violently ripped away. The crushing weight lifted from my chest. The deafening cacophony of screeching metal and shattering glass dimmed into a profound, eerie silence. The chaotic, spinning blur of the accident scene slowed to an absolute halt, as if the fabric of time itself was unraveling at the seams. That was the exact moment I realized something that sent a wave of pure horror through me. I was still there. I was completely conscious, entirely present, but I was no longer inside my body. At first, a desperate wave of logic tried to save me. I thought I was simply in profound shock, that my brain was shutting down and firing off random synapses, creating a vivid hallucination to protect me from the trauma of the impact. But when I looked down, my stomach twisted into a knot of absolute disbelief. I was hovering roughly 10 feet in the air, looking down at the mangled, smoking wreckage of my own car. Inside the crushed cabin, pinned beneath the steering column, was my own body. My face was unnaturally pale, my head slumped at a tragic angle, my eyes staring blankly forward. My body was completely lifeless. Below me, the real world was continuing in frantic real time. I watched people running from their vehicles toward the wreck. A man in a business suit was pacing frantically, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice trembling as he screamed for an ambulance. In the far distance, the faint, rising wail of sirens began to pierce the air. I panicked. I frantically tried to move back toward the car, to slide back into my skin, to speak, to scream for someone to look up and help me. I screamed until I thought my throat would tear, but it was entirely useless. No sound emerged. No one turned their head. I was a ghost at my own funeral, completely invisible, entirely severed from the material world. A frantic, wild panic set in. Was this death? Was this what happened to everyone? Was I supposed to go somewhere now, or was I doomed to hover over this asphalt intersection for eternity? Where was the peace I had heard about? Where was God? Before I could even begin to process the sheer weight of these questions, a sudden force gripped me. It wasn't a gentle, comforting tug or a magnetic pull. It was an absolute, undeniable cosmic authority, an invisible hand that reached out from the void and grabbed hold of my very soul. I was being taken somewhere, and my human will meant absolutely nothing in the face of this power. The physical world below me began to dissolve. The street, the flashing lights of the arriving emergency vehicles, the shattered glass, and the frantic cries of the crowd blurred together into a vortex of meaningless shapes before fading into absolute nothingness. I thought I was losing consciousness, drifting into the final void of death, but I was actually about to cross the threshold into reality itself and discover the most terrifying truths hidden within the ancient pages of the Bible. I felt myself being propelled forward through an immense, expanding tunnel. It bore no resemblance to the cliché near-death stories I had dismissed on television, where people spoke of a warm, inviting, gentle light pulling them toward a peaceful afterlife. Yes, there was a light at the end of this cosmic corridor, but it was accompanied by a staggering, monumental weight. It was a spiritual gravity that pressed into the core of my being, filling me with a terrifying awareness that something immense, something completely beyond the capacity of human comprehension, was at work. I moved faster and faster through this tunnel of light, stripped of any concept of human time or distance. Seconds, hours, and years lost all meaning. Was this heaven? Was I about to meet God? For a brief, fleeting moment, a wave of familiar peace wrapped around me like a protective shroud, calming the frantic pacing of my soul. But before I could fully surrender to that comfort, an intense spiritual tension took its place. The light illuminating the tunnel wasn't a static white glow. It shifted, vibrated, and pulsed with a sentient, terrifying energy that I couldn't explain. There was a living, breathing intelligence within the light itself. It wasn't just directing my path or leading me to a destination. It was actively transporting me for a deliberate, sovereign reason. Deep within the core of my spirit, a sudden realization crystallized. I wasn't just being brought home to rest. I was being brought here to be a witness. I emerged from the pulsing tunnel into a reality that defied human language. The transition was seamless yet jarring, like stepping into a world that had always been right beside me, hidden only by a thin, fragile veil. The air itself felt alive, not merely breathable, but charged with a radiant, electric purity. Colors shimmered with a brilliant, deep intensity that made the physical world seem like a pale, washed-out shadow. But beneath the breathtaking beauty lay a staggering spiritual gravity. The atmosphere held a massive weight of expectation, as if the entire realm was waiting for a single, defining moment. Then I saw him. At first, he was a figure walking toward me from the enveloping light. But as he drew closer, the atmosphere shifted, bowing to his presence. I knew immediately, without a single word being uttered, that this was Jesus. His presence was completely overwhelming, saturating every corner of my consciousness before he even spoke. It wasn't just a wave of unconditional love. It was an absolute, blinding authority and raw, unfiltered power. It was truth itself standing before me in human form. I fell to my knees instantly. It wasn't a conscious decision or a polite gesture of respect. My soul simply buckled under the weight of his majesty. I expected to feel a crushing sense of terror or a paralyzing shame for every mistake, doubt, and sin I had ever committed in my earthly life. Instead, I felt completely seen. His eyes held an infinite, deep knowing. He knew everything about me, my hidden fears, my secret faults, and yet his gaze carried no condemnation. Then he spoke my name. Jessica. The sound of his voice resonated through the very fabric of my being. It wasn't just a name, it was an invitation and a profound awakening. You have been chosen to see what has been hidden, he said, his voice calm but filled with an immense, echoing gravity. Before I could form a question, the radiant landscape vanished. The comforting light receded, and the atmosphere grew incredibly tense. Suddenly, I was standing in a completely different realm, a place before human time. I wasn't just watching a vision, I was physically there, a witness to history before the creation of dust. The sky above me was an endless, shimmering expanse of living light and celestial energy. Then I saw them, angels. Hundreds of thousands of majestic beings moving in perfect, beautiful harmony. They were nothing like the soft, delicate figures painted on church walls. These were warriors of light, radiant, towering, and exuding an unimaginable strength and divine order. I stood paralyzed, mesmerized by their absolute perfection. Then, a sudden, chilling shift occurred. A massive faction within their ranks began to move out of formation. It was subtle at first, but a dark, creeping shadow began to stain their brilliant radiance. Their posture changed from worship to fierce defiance. Jesus' voice echoed directly inside my mind. These are the ones who fell. I watched in mounting horror as the first rebellious angel stepped forward. His form, once a pinnacle of heavenly beauty, twisted with a sudden, ugly corruption. I could feel the spiritual weight of his thoughts radiating across the expanse, pride, bitter defiance, and an insatiable hunger for an authority that was never meant to be his. He refused to serve. He refused to submit. He wanted to be exalted above the throne of the Creator. Like a wildfire consuming a pristine forest, the rebellion spread instantly through a third of the heavenly host. They turned their backs on the divine order, their light dimming into a cold, menacing darkness. Then came the moment of no return. The fallen ones were cast down. It wasn't a slow, gentle descent. It was a violent, catastrophic expulsion. They were hurled from the celestial heights with unimaginable force. I watched their magnificent forms twist and distort as their heavenly garments of light were violently stripped away. They plummeted through the void, completely severed from the presence of God, falling toward a newly formed, fragile world below, Earth. I watched in stunned, breathless silence as the fallen angels descended upon the earth. As they entered the physical atmosphere, their forms began to shimmer and warp, shifting fluidly between pure, chaotic celestial energy and something far more solid and human-like. I realized with a knot of dread that they possessed the power to manifest in the material world, to take on fleshly forms, to blend in, and to walk openly among mankind. But they were nothing like the holy emissaries who remained loyal to the Creator. A deep, agonizing wrongness radiated from them, a spiritual rot that infected the air around them. Even though their physical appearance remained dazzling, almost hypnotic to human eyes, it was a hollow shell hiding an insatiable hunger for power, worship, and absolute control. They had refused to serve in heaven, and now they intended to rule on earth. At first, they did not wage an open war of destruction. Instead, they observed. They hovered around the fringes of early human civilization, studying mankind with cold, calculating curiosity as people built their first villages, raised families, and worked the soil. But that curiosity quickly turned into malicious intent. They saw how vulnerable, how easily amazed, and how spiritually innocent humanity was. Then the interaction began. The fallen ones approached men and women, pretending to be benevolent benefactors. They began offering deep, hidden knowledge, teaching humanity secrets that no human mind was ever meant to possess. They whispered forbidden wisdom into the ears of early kings and tribal rulers, introducing technologies and concepts that disrupted the natural order. Through the vision, I saw one of these beings, his presence both mesmerizing and terrifying, standing over a primitive forge. He was teaching human blacksmiths how to smelt and shape metal into deadly weapons of war, introducing bloodshed and organized slaughter to the earth. Another fallen being stood before a gathering of women, showing them how to mix cosmetics, paints, and powders to alter their appearance, teaching them the art of seduction and manipulation. I watched as strange, geometric symbols were etched into stone altars, creating languages with hidden, dark currents, the birth of incantations, sorcery, and enchantments. They weren't helping humanity grow. They were systematically rewriting human nature, binding people to the material world through greed and vanity. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. Why are they doing this? His expression was filled with a profound, divine sorrow, yet anchored in absolute authority. Because they desired to be worshipped, and mankind, in its innocence, did not understand the cost of their gifts. When I looked back down at the earth, the scene had shifted into something far worse. The fallen ones were no longer just teaching from the shadows. They were actively taking human women for themselves. They selected the most beautiful, the most desirable, and claimed them without hesitation. Some women attempted to resist the terrifying majesty of these beings, but others were completely lured in by the promises of power, status, and supernatural wealth. And from those unnatural unions, the abominations were born, the Nephilim. I gasped, taking a step back as I witnessed the birth and growth of these creatures. Their forms towered over normal men, their eyes glowing with an unsettling, unearthly light. They were giants, but their deformity wasn't just a matter of physical height. There was an inherently corrupted, monstrous nature to their very anatomy. They were a violent contradiction, a genetic and spiritual violation of the sacred boundaries God had established for creation. Some were physically grotesque, their features stretched and distorted by unmatched muscle and bone density. Others looked almost entirely human, but they possessed a dark, magnetic presence that sent chills straight through my soul. They were neither fully angel nor fully man. They were a hybrid blight upon the earth. They grew with terrifying speed, and the moment they reached maturity, they completely dominated human civilization. I watched in absolute horror as the Nephilim took over the world with an iron fist. They demanded absolute submission and literal worship from the human populations. Because of their titanic sizes and supernatural metabolisms, they consumed resources at an alarming, catastrophic rate, devouring crops and livestock faster than human communities could provide. When the fields were emptied, their hunger did not stop. They turned on humanity itself. They became literal gods among men, and a terrified, blinded humanity bowed flat on their faces before them. The world began to warp under their influence. Monumental structures rose into the sky, and empires expanded across the continents. But it wasn't true human progress. It was total spiritual and physical slavery. The Nephilim had turned the earth into a playground of oppression, endless bloodshed, and dark idolatry. I turned back to Jesus, my hands shaking uncontrollably, tears blurring my vision. Why did you allow this to happen to the world? His eyes met mine, filled with a righteous, heavy judgment. I did not allow it. Mankind did. The fallen ones offered power, and humanity accepted it willingly. The Nephilim ruled, and the people bowed. But what you are about to see next is precisely why I had to bring a catastrophic end to it all. The world shifted again, plunging me into the final, agonizing days of that ancient era. I had always imagined the pre-flood world as a primitive place of mud and simple stone tools. But what lay before me was a terrifyingly advanced, dystopian civilization. I stood upon a high ridge looking down into an immense metropolis. Massive golden altars gleamed under a blood-red sky, and colossal stone monuments rose like skyscrapers, carved with the horrific likenesses of the Nephilim. Humanity was entirely enslaved. People flooded the streets, throwing themselves into the dust to worship these towering hybrids. I watched with a sickening knot in my chest as the Nephilim feasted on a scale that defied reason, consuming blood, flesh, and the very life of the land. The ultimate horror came when I saw children dragged to the tops of the altars, offered as living sacrifices to appease the insatiable hunger of these false gods. I turned away, sobbing, "No." Jesus stood beside me, his presence a sharp beacon of purity against the surrounding rot. "This is why it had to be stopped," he said softly. The Nephilim were not human. They were a genetic and spiritual infection, a complete distortion of everything I created. He lifted his hand, directing my gaze to a small, isolated settlement outside the city. There stood a single man, Noah. Unlike the world around him, a gentle, clean light radiated from his spirit. His family stood behind him, completely untouched by the hybrid corruption. "Why him?" My voice shook. "Because he was the last," Jesus replied. The fallen ones had corrupted the DNA of mankind, the animals, and the earth itself. Only Noah remained pure in his generations. Suddenly, the judgment fell. The skies turned black as midnight, the ground fractured, and catastrophic fountains of water erupted from deep within the earth, while the heavens literally ripped open. A torrent of divine power swept across the landscape. The Nephilim screamed in sudden, agonizing realization as their immense strength proved useless against the wrath of the Creator. The empires of the giants were instantly erased, buried deep beneath the roaring waters. I felt a profound wave of relief. The corruption was gone. The earth was cleansed. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief, Jesus turned to me, his eyes blazing with prophetic gravity. "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be before the coming of the Son of Man." The vision violently fast-forwarded, and the ancient waters dissolved into the glass, steel, and concrete of our modern world. I saw towering cities, rushing highways, and millions of people walking the streets, their eyes glued to glowing digital screens, completely oblivious to the spiritual atmosphere around them. "But Lord," I stammered, "I thought the Nephilim were destroyed." "The bodies of the giants perished," Jesus explained, "but the fallen ones never left. They merely changed their tactics." As he spoke, the surface of modern society peeled back like a veil, revealing a hidden, terrifying reality. The fallen angels were still here, operating from the shadows of our most powerful institutions. They no longer demanded worship in crude stone temples. They had constructed new, sophisticated altars. I saw their invisible, dark threads woven through global corporations, media empires, and high levels of government. I watched powerful figures in closed-door meetings signing laws and agreements, entirely unaware that their minds were being subtly guided by ancient, malicious entities. I saw celebrities and cultural icons glorified on digital stages, broadcasting subliminal symbols and messages that dulled the moral compass of millions. Worse out, I saw hidden laboratory rooms where scientists were actively modifying the human genome, manipulating DNA under the guise of medical advancement and progress. It was the exact same genetic tampering that had occurred before the flood, an attempt to rewrite the image of God in man. The deception was so flawless, so absolute, that the world was walking straight into the trap without asking a single question. The modern world darkened as the spiritual veil peeled back even further, forcing me to look directly into the final endgame of the fallen ones. Everything I had witnessed, the ancient rebellion, the birth of the Nephilim, and the subtle manipulation of our modern systems, was converging toward a single, terrifying historical climax, the arrival of their king. Jesus lifted his hand, and the near future unfolded before my eyes. I saw a world fractured by engineered chaos, deep confusion, and overwhelming fear. People everywhere were desperately searching for answers, looking to technology, science, and global leaders to save them from a collapsing society. Then came the Great Deception. I watched as immense, radiant entities descended from the skies with a display of spectacular, supernatural power. The world fell to its knees in absolute awe. These beings didn't call themselves demons or fallen angels. They presented themselves as benevolent saviors. Some claimed to be the ancient architects who had engineered humanity. Others claimed to be highly evolved cosmic guides come to lead mankind into a new age of peace and enlightenment. World leaders openly embraced them. The media glorified them, and even many churches compromised their faith to welcome them. They performed breathtaking miracles, healed the sick, and offered a seamless solution to every global crisis. And at the center of this false awakening, their king emerged. A single human figure rose to absolute global power, riding a wave of supernatural devotion. He spoke with hypnotic eloquence, uniting nations under a single global economy and a one-world religion. He was the Antichrist. He will be fully empowered by the same fallen ones who ruled before the flood. Jesus' voice broke through my terror. "How can they not see the truth?" I cried out. "Because they have already rejected it," Jesus replied with deep sorrow. "They chose their idols, and now they will believe the lie." I watched as millions willingly received a mark of allegiance to this new world order. The moment the mark entered their bodies, something in their spirits permanently darkened, altering their very souls. Yet amidst the darkness, I saw a hidden remnant. Scattered across the globe were ordinary believers who refused to bow. They were hunted, ridiculed, and stripped of everything, yet they stood firm, protected by an unshakable faith. I fell to my knees, weeping. "Jesus, how do we fight this?" "Only those who know my word will see through the deception," he answered, his voice echoing with absolute sovereignty. "Return to me, reject the false narratives of this world. Tell them the time is short." The moment he spoke those final words, a violent force gripped my soul. I was ripped backward out of the vision. The celestial realm, the global armies, and the radiant presence of Jesus collapsed into a spinning vortex of wind and light. "No." "Wait," I screamed, trying to hold on, but it was useless. Suddenly, I gasped. Air flooded into my lungs like liquid fire. My chest heaved violently, and my body convulsed. A sharp, sterile fluorescent light burned my eyes. I heard the frantic beeping of medical monitors and smelled the sharp scent of antiseptic. I was back. I blinked against the glare, looking around a crowded hospital room. Doctors, nurses, and my sobbing family stood frozen in absolute shock. "This is impossible," a nurse whispered, her hands trembling as she checked my pulse. "She was in a deep coma. She wasn't supposed to survive." But I knew it wasn't a medical miracle. I had been sent back with a sovereign purpose. The ordinary woman who had driven through that yellow light was gone. I had seen the truth. I had witnessed the hidden history of the world and the trap that is currently closing around humanity. I looked up toward the ceiling, whispering a silent vow. "Thank you, Jesus, I will tell them." Now I am looking directly at you. If you are reading this, you were meant to receive this warning. The systems of this world are conditioning you to accept a massive, coming lie. Do not be deceived by the culture, the media, or the shadows. Wake up, read your Bible, and return to the Creator. Jesus is the only way out.